All right, guys, what is up? Welcome in another episode of GC Live, presented by our guy, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Lots to get to today, of course. Some not so great news on the football front in terms of injuries, and then some really interesting, exciting news on the South Carolina men's basketball side that we're going to get to. As we always tell you, first of all, if you're in the market for a new home, hit up our guy, Clint. He is the man when it comes to mortgages in the Columbia area and then even throughout South Carolina. And then you'll have to check on particular states, but many neighboring states, he can help you as well. So, again, hit up our guy, Clint, if you're in the market to buy a house. 803-422-6797. Chris, let's start with the most recent news. Typically, this version of GC Live with you and me, we, for the most part, stick to football. But this one is big enough, man. And we do like recruiting, so it factors in. I feel like we got to talk about the return of Meechie Johnson to South Carolina. That news now official. And just before we get any questions, not an April Fool's joke. I was floored by the number of people responding on social media across all the platforms saying, is this April Fool's? If you've been paying attention to the reporting from all the South Carolina outlets, including Gamecock Central, leading up to today, this is not a surprise. This is not a shock, but it is now official. Meechie Johnson to go from, yes, let's just acknowledge it, Ohio State, South Carolina, Ohio State, South Carolina. I do believe we'll try it. We're working on getting a complete confirmation on, does he still need a waiver for that final year? Has that already been granted? Obviously, though, South Carolina, we can say this much, they feel good about him being able to have another season of eligibility, or they would not be bringing him in. And, Chris, first and foremost, this gives Carolina kind of a quick trio from the portal. We knew they were going to be active. Meechie, the third commit. We'll maybe get into a couple of the other guys too. But Meechie, the third commit, really from the weekend into today, kind of a quick flurry of action. And as soon as he entered the portal, this possibility became very real.
It did. And, an interesting move, a little, and Meechie even, which I kind of thought was cool, Wes, even acknowledged on social media this afternoon after this news came out and after he announced it. Hey, I realize this is not, your typical path. You and I are trying to think. I still haven't come up with anybody that's done a similar path to that. Has it happened before? Maybe so. But it doesn't happen every day, right? So everybody realizes this is kind of unconventional, right? But Meechie was a guy that when he was here at South Carolina, had some huge games, made some of the most memorable plays over the last several years, was part of some big wins, right? Was part of a really good team, not this past season, but the year before, that got the Gamecocks back to the NCAA tournament. And so once he hit the portal, you're right, you definitely are monitoring this possibility. And it's fascinating, Wes, when you look, and I won't spend too much time big picture, but it was clear there was going to have to be a direction for this team. The question was, what would Lamont Paris's strategy be? And they have seemed to go more the direction of, a very interesting direction of seeing a lot of guys leave. You've got the lingering, will CMB come back? Because obviously that would be huge for this team if he does, but he has that decision to make because he's a great pro prospect. You've got an element of getting the band back together, right? With some guys that Meechie coming back, some other guys returning. But you also, and you got some freshmen, and then you've also got an element of going out and really hitting the portal hard, which they've done. They've got some guys in from the portal, one who's a familiar face in Meechie, a couple others that are new to the program completely. And Wes, probably going to be some more out there. But I think what you see with Meechie is a guy that can score, a guy that can create his own shot, a guy that can shoot from outside. And when you kind of look at what was missing this past season, a lot of times you're watching the games and you're feeling like, man, they're kind of missing Meechie, of that guy who can make plays and at any time can make something happen for you. And so they've got him, and they've got another guy, I think, in Trey Eaglestaff that can do the same thing from the perimeter.
Yeah, and Chris, we have, of course, one of my favorite things, the return of what? The Meechie go-off game. So,
Yes,
welcome back to that. And let's call it what it is. Meechie, he has been streaky at times in his career. I think if we had him on here, he would probably admit that as well. But, man, he gives you a guy who just at any given moment can take over a game. And of course, Carolina had CMB who could take over games, but nobody really in kind of that guard wing category that could just beat people off the dribble, force defenses to adjust. And Meechie also gives you great range when he is on. His 3-point range is pretty deep too. And I just think gives you an edge, man. I mean, this is a guy who, better, worse, or in the middle, was willing to take the shot with the game on the line. How many close games did this team lose this past year, where you needed somebody to just take control? And, I have the older I get, the more I have a great deal of respect for somebody who's willing to miss the final shot, like willing to deal with the repercussions of, hey, I'm either going to be the person who makes it or have to deal with being the person who misses it. And, it just seemed like at times, like this team this year, they never quit, to their credit, but also it seemed like at times there was some indecision on, I don't know if I'm going to be the guy to take the ball when it really matters. And I think Meechie, now there's going to be a good thing for this team and for him. We believe there's going to be some other options to potentially take that shot, like B shot as well. But Meechie gives you that. And I think when you start looking at the possibility of putting him on the floor at the same time as a Trayson Eaglestaff and, bring in an Eli Ellis, a guy we know can score. I think Christ Esendoko is a intriguing addition just in terms of the fit with what South Carolina wants to do. And I think they got away a little bit just in terms of skill set from what they had the year before when they were successful. And I think the scheme they want to run, what they want to be, didn't necessarily square up with some of the skill sets of the guys that were having to play. And I think so far, I mean, we already know one of them fits in Meechie because we saw it for 2 years, second team All SEC. I don't think South Carolina fans are at the point right now of being too picky about adding all SEC quality players. And, then I think you have in Esendoko a guy who can maybe extend out and be kind of that BJ Mack type role for you. So I think this class is going to be a little bit more about, hey, not only do we have to add some players, they absolutely need to fit this scheme, not just, hey, who's the best player available? Who's the best player that fits that is available?
Yeah, and I go back to not this past offseason, which, of course, I mean, Wes, ultimately the proof's in the pudding, right? We can kind of relitigate the why of everything, but this past offseason, as the results show, was not quite what South Carolina needed, right? The one before that absolutely was, because this is a team that was on the verge of winning the league. I know the league wasn't as strong as it was this past year, right? This most recent season, but still a good league, and got back to the NCAA tournament and was an extremely tough out for anybody to play. Well, where do those guys come from? You had Talon Cooper, who had played at some different schools, including Morehead State with Janai Broome, and played at I almost lose track, Minnesota, had played like 150 games by the time he got here. And people who knew basketball were like, seems like a good get. Nobody was going, this is one of the best portal gets in the country. But that's what it was, at the end of the day. BJ Mack, people are going, okay, South Florida, Wofford, sounds intriguing. He can shoot, right? Maybe this will be a pretty good get. Those two guys ended up playing huge roles, and to your point, were great fits for what South Carolina wanted to do. So, yes, you can look at the stats, but I think more so, what's the skill set? What's the fit? And when you look at the guys that South Carolina has as possibly coming back and guys that they do have now in the fold in the 3 transfers specifically, you can kind of see, you could start piecing this thing together in terms of the fit. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not sitting there saying, well, Carolina's probably going to win the league or be in the, I don't know yet, but you needed a lot this offseason and off to a pretty solid start there in the portal.
Yeah, by the way, after committing over the weekend, South Carolina men's basketball has announced that Trayson Eaglestaff has also officially signed with South Carolina as of today, which, not that there were any signs otherwise, but is noteworthy just because this is someone that Gonzaga wanted, Kentucky wanted, Kansas wanted, and we know how recruiting works, man. Just because you commit to someone doesn't mean these other coaches are going to stop. So getting him locked up, not only as a commitment, but also now signed and will be at South Carolina in June. A big deal there for South Carolina to add another scorer to this bunch. And, I think last thing I'll say on Meechie, I remember, so I had a Garnet Trust sit down with Meechie, and but part of the reason I think that South Carolina is probably so open to bringing him back too, considering he came here, left, and then wanted to come back, is the fact he was going home to Ohio State, and I think that was probably the school he grew up wanting to go to, and then it didn't work out the first time, but there was a coaching change, and I remember now this was when he was still at South Carolina the first time, he gave me basically a recruiting pitch for why he would tell any top prospect in the country to play for Lamont Paris. And so Meechie, and it was passionate, it was detailed, it was from the heart. And, I don't think this was a typical when he left, just, I'm out of here. Peace out. I have no love for you guys anymore. I think it was truly about going home, and I think he thought this was going to be his last chance to go home and play. He played his role. He played his heart out at South Carolina, and then after the 2 seasons, he saw the chance to go home, and he did, and it just didn't work out. So, I certainly can understand Ohio State fans being pissed. They can be ticked off right now. I get it. But from a South Carolina perspective, this is a kid that loved Lamont Paris, loved his experience here. And again, I just don't think you can be that picky either about saying, we don't, if you don't believe in bringing a guy back, that's one thing, but don't deny his talent. Like he was the leading scorer, up and down a little bit or not. He was the leading scorer on the team that won more games than any team in South Carolina history, and on your only most recent team to go to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it brings to mind what you always say, and typically you're talking about outgoing guys, but transfers are not all the same. They're not all created equal. And you can think about that with incoming transfers too, or outgoing. Meechie Johnson has the odd distinction of being an outgoing and an incoming, which you don't see a lot, obviously, as we said. So when he left, it wasn't just, I want to go somewhere where I can play more. It wasn't, excuse the language, screw you guys, I'm out of here. It wasn't either of those, it was something in the middle. And that's why, people don't really like a lot of times nuance in sports. They like it to be very black and white. But it's a nuanced situation because it was kind of unique. And that's why we're here. That's why we're in a situation with Meechie where he started at one school, came here, left for that same school, came back to South Carolina again. But he is a guy that talent-wise, there's a comfort level there. He's comfortable with Lamont Paris. They're comfortable with him. You know what you're getting with Meechie Johnson. And that is a guy that can, to your point, Wes, have that go-off game. And is someone that's played a lot of basketball. So very intriguing pickup when you kind of piece him together with the other guys that they've got in this class. And we'll see where the rest of this thing goes as time goes on.
Yeah, for sure. Adam here asking 2 questions. Chance Collin returns and then of the guys so far who starts, so hard to project starters this far out. I mean, I tend to think, for one, we're going to see them go out and get a transfer portal point guard. I also was, in no uncertain terms, told, hey, we're not done yet. So stay tuned. More good news potentially to come in the pretty near future for South Carolina men's basketball, or at least that's what they're anticipating. But we don't know yet what the point guard spot might look like, but certainly going to see them try to target someone to come in and play the point. I would guess as of this exact moment, you're looking at something like transfer point guard, Meechie, Eagle staff, CMB if he returns, and then Essendoko at the 5 potentially is what you're looking at. And to answer the question on CMB, I don't think anybody truly knows unless something has changed, like unless he has made a decision in the last 24 hours, and we just don't know yet. I don't think anybody knows what he's going to do. I will also say I think there's more of a chance of him coming back than just the average person saying, oh, this guy's projected to be a first rounder would think. Like, I think there's you have a lot more going in your favor. In fact, I mean, I would say there's like some quiet confidence. Like, I'm not saying I'm leaning towards one way or the other, but I think there's some quiet confidence that South Carolina has a chance to get him back. Obviously I would expect him to go through the NBA draft process. But I mean, Chris, there's certainly going to be NIL reasons. There's certainly, he's a local guy. He's got personal reasons to want to stay at South Carolina. There's lots of things that would point in your favor of keeping him that on the surface would just, if you just picked a random first rounder or maybe not at play.
Yeah, it's at least a discussion, right? And, I think coming into the offseason, you go, it's going to be tough to keep him, right? He could be a lottery pick. If not, he could be a first-round pick. That seems to be, I don't know about a consensus, Wes, but like as close as you can get that he's a first-round type of talent in the NBA. And then, it probably wouldn't be as much of it if Colin Murray Boyles was, he'll be the number 1 pick, right? He's probably going. And who could blame him? But it's not really that. And so while it can be, I think it's still accurate to say that there's an element of, hey, it could be tough to keep him. All those other things that you mentioned, including South Carolina's ability from an NIL standpoint, you can even some of those things out to where it is a decision. There are some times where you get wind, going into an off season or in recruiting, like high school recruiting, and you hear, here's what's happening, and it's cut and dry, and that's what it is. That's not the case here. There's a legitimate discussion. There's a legitimate decision to be made here where you can't just assume, probable first-round pick, he's gone, and that's not really how you can classify this. And, man, when you take the guys who are coming in and the guys who are on the roster, and you can count returners, transfers, and freshmen like Eli Ellis that you mentioned, Wes. Good start, right? But when you think about those guys plus CMB, then you can really start seeing it come together. So you can't really overstate how significant that would be for this program. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no doubt. I think at the very least, and obviously, I mean, CMB, Chris, is a type of talent that just kind of changes the entire picture of what you think of a roster. I think so. Certainly, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but at the same time, I do feel like you can start to kind of see the pieces of what they're trying to put together with this group moving forward. All right, before we turn to some football, we're going to talk some spring ball with football. Chris, you want to tell them about one of our newest sponsors here on GC Live?
I will, if you don't mind putting up the graphic for me, because the people are not aware. My computer is pretty iffy right now, so we're hanging on by a thread, Wes. But our guy Brandon Cohen, Palmetto Golfing Belts, Palmetto Golfing It is golf season in South Carolina or wherever you are. Weather's beautiful. Great time to go out and play some golf. And if you're looking for some new gear, our guy Brandon, big Gamecock fan and long-time Gamecock Central member, you can go support his business. But you're not just supporting his business, you're getting some amazing stuff at a great price. Wes, needlepoint belts with South Carolina covers or the cross design. You can get golf gloves that are packaged beautifully, the Palmetto State flag on those, or Gamecock colors, South Carolina colors. Also, golf towels, large towels that you can wrap around your golf clubs. All sorts of stuff in the Palmetto Golf and Belt store. Go to palmettogolfing.com and do a little browsing. If you don't like golf, if you're not a great golfer like me, that's okay. You can still go check out the needlepoint belts. He also has custom golf tees that are packaged in a set of 100, also in South Carolina covers. palmettogolfing.com. Check it out.
Chris, when you say if you're not a great golfer like me, are you saying you are a great golfer, or you're saying if you're not a great golfer like me?
I'm a poor golfer. So if like me, comma, you are a poor golfer, comma,
there you go.
Just go get a needlepoint belt. I have one. They are amazing. Check them out. If you are a golfer, they have even more stuff for you. So win-win.
There you go. Check them out right now. And shout out to our new sponsor there. Appreciate all the support there. All right, guys. We promised we'd talk football. Not to be a bearer of bad news, you may have already seen it, but a couple of significant injuries that will at least keep a couple of guys out for the remainder of the spring. And Chris, two guys that, one of which we were talking about probably as a potential starter, the other one in the mix, South Carolina guard Nick Sharp, who is a transfer in from Wake Forest. He is out for the remainder of the spring. And then Jalen Brown, the edge prospect from Missouri, who really high upside guy, someone that South Carolina recruited originally out of high school, got him out of the portal this past window. He is out for the remainder of spring as well. Now, to clarify, Shane Beamer did not say specifically what the injuries are, what that might mean for after spring, but certainly, let's start with Sharp. That's someone that I think you could, at the very least, pencil in as competing for a starting spot. And depending on your opinion, maybe you would even say would have been the favorite for one of those guard spots. So for Carolina and for Nick, an older guy, a veteran guy, you certainly hope this is something that, is not something that lingers on into the season.
Yeah, that is the question, right? What exactly is the injury? What does it look like? I think there's some good fortune here in that you do have Tree Babalade, who has versatility, who can play a guard position. You have, Marquis Anderson, who's been repping some at center. He can play a guard spot. You've got RJ Newsome or Boaz Stanley, as transfers, again, mainly working at center, but they can always slide out. Shed Surratt, Wes, has been doing some good things even as a true freshman during spring. So you've got some options here, but you bring in Sharp and kind of think of him as, okay, here's a guy who's going to compete immediately. Staff likes, they feel like he's played against high-level competition, which he has. When he was at Wake, played a lot of snaps, played against Clemson, played against Ole Miss. He's played Power 4 ball. He's used to not an SEC schedule every week, but he's seen what good looks like. And so at the very minimum, you're thinking he's going to compete, push everybody, at worst be a depth piece, but at best, as you said, Wes, could end up winning a starting position just like, Kamar Bell did last year, Torricelli Simpkins. So it is a blow not to have him. We'll see ultimately how long he's out. Hopefully Carolina can get him back, and you'll probably be able to get him at his age with this experience level, probably be able to get him up to speed. But that's a question that's just going to kind of linger for now.
Yeah, and similarly with Jalen Brown, no specifics, and someone that, I don't know that I necessarily would have given him quite as high of a percentage to go ahead and start at the edge spot opposite of Dylan Stewart as maybe I would have given for Sharp to possibly start at guard, but also not out of the realm of possibility. I think it was just going to be about how quickly did Jalen pick things up. A little bit younger guy, doesn't have the experience that Sharp did on the other side of the ball, but a lengthy, actually fairly big already at 270 pounds. Certainly someone who, if healthy, factors into the mix, into that rotation for South Carolina at edge, where I think we're all kind of just wondering, how does the cream rise to the top, or who rises to the top over there with, you'd imagine, Brian Thomas Jr., the favorite right now to start opposite of Dylan Stewart. So either way, I think especially with Jalen being a young guy, you would have liked to have seen him getting as many reps as possible this spring, learning under the tutelage of Sterling Lucas, who we know is really good at developing guys, and just putting himself in that position to make that jump moving forward.
Yeah, this is something you and I have discussed. You obviously know Dylan's at a spot. Brian Thomas, who's played in a bunch of games and has been a part-time starter, or kind of considered a co-starter by the defensive staff. Those are your two guys who you're rolling out there with the ones, right? We know that. But if you're South Carolina, do you have somebody who can maybe push? Do you have who are your guys? Who are your next men up? And so this has been important this spring for somebody to kind of take that mantle, or multiple guys. And so I think the guys you look at were Jalen Brown coming in here, where he's only played a season at Missouri, but his position coach at Missouri took the unprecedented step of saying some really nice things about Jalen Brown on Twitter after he left and committed to South Carolina. Guy with a lot of upside. You have, a JT Gear, Wes. You have Des Umeazulu and some other guys who are in that mix. So who is it? Jalen Brown was somebody that you kind of penciled in as, okay, this is a name to watch this spring. Let's see how he progresses, because he is talented. Someone that Sterling Lucas was familiar with during recruiting, got him out of the portal, and kind of just a very intriguing name. So it won't be him, at least this spring. Also begs the question, how long ultimately will he be out? We don't know. But you are one more man down at a position where you're trying to build some additional depth.
Yeah, certainly hate it for him. Some, I would say, good news from Beamer, you would say. Bakari Swain in, quote, great standing with the team and will be back sooner rather than later. That, of course, a spot where we feel like South Carolina does have some depth in the secondary, particularly, I would say, at cornerback. But Bakari, as we have talked about, really for 2 years now, one of the best athletes on the team, and someone that will be competing for snaps there in the secondary. And I still think gives you a little bit of that freedom to potentially move Kilgore back to safety if you had to, even though we have been told multiple times by multiple coaches now at this point that the plan and the hope is to keep Kilgore there at nickel. But having Bakari, assuming he does everything he needs to do, which it sounds like he's taking those steps, having him back in there at corner just gives you a lot of guys to work with there, man.
Yeah, it does. You think about the corner position and the nickel position, even without Bakari, and of course you want him because he's a talented dude, one of the best athletes on the team. And even though he's just played in 16 games, you can kind of see that progression through the first couple years. Expect him to take a leap this year. But at corner and nickel, you feel like you have some options, right? You brought in Cisse, who can play either spot. You brought in Miles Norwood, who's played a good bit of college ball and can play corner. You've got Emory Floyd back. You've got Judge out there. You got Jalewis Solomon, who, played some corner last year as a true freshman. You feel like you've got some options, but with Bakari back in the fold, always good. We always thought this was the plan, Wes. It's just additional confirmation that he's in good standing. At some point, he'll be back before the season. That just gives you an even better feeling about corner and nickel. And to your point, some additional flexibility if you decide to do some additional shuffling in an effort to find that best five.
Yeah, and right now, looks like Peyton Williams sort of first guy up in terms of trying to replace Nicky Mawori. We'll see what happens there moving forward. Obviously, you got David Busey in there, Joe Kilgore. They moved Kelvin Hunter to safety as a little bit more, maybe as someone who can provide depth. And, we'll see where that one goes. But just something to monitor. Another position battle to monitor that Beamer spoke about today. I'm sure somebody on our team at Gamecock Central will write about this one specifically, but there's a transcript of Beamer's comments going up actually in about 15 minutes where you can go read it. And the backup quarterback battle, as we suspected and as we've talked about, is going to be interesting. I think, Chris, there was maybe a sense of, hey, Air Nolan rolls right along in and kind of is the guy. But I think there's a real battle here. And so, for Carolina, not much experience there. And I'll be completely frank. I'm going off of Jack's live updates. I have not heard the extent of Beamer's comments on this, so I want to be completely honest on that. But I believe he did acknowledge in a certain way, hey, Luke is still or is back working with the quarterbacks. And that's something we have talked about because that's what we'd heard and reported. But I believe maybe the first real confirmation of that from Beamer. And I think Chris is not, I would say that's not for nothing because as we've talked about, yes, you bring back Lenoris, but after that, complete lack of experience in that QB room without our guy Luke Doty in there. So it makes sense to have him there.
Well, and we've done this a lot, but you think about last season, you went in with the expectation that Lenoris Sellers would ultimately win the job. He did. And then you always had in the back of your mind, if Lenoris has to come out, which happened during the season more than once, who are you going to plug in? Well, Robbie Ashford, who's played a lot of football. That was a good thing to have. Now you go to this year, Wes, it's a different question. There's no question as to who's going to be the starter. But if you ask, all right, if something happens and Lenoris has to come out for whatever reason, who's the next guy? You really had to come into the spring with a guessing game or an estimation. But one thing that was different is whoever that guy was going to be somebody with really no experience. Cutter Woods, literally no experience. Dante Reno, just a smidge of taking, a couple snaps in a game. And then Aaron Nolan, who redshirted last year at Ohio State. But now you factor in Luke Doty, who has not just played but started at quarterback and been around the program a long time and is someone that the staff seems to trust. That makes a lot of sense to have him there. And so Beamer, from what he said, Wes, they don't have a QB2. That question has not been resolved. I think they are mixing up those reps. That's what he said. Mike, mentioned that Aaron Nolan took the offense on a 19-play scoring drive today, and that Mike Shula, the offensive coordinator, is mixing up the reps. Where does it ultimately land? Do we know exiting spring who's number 2? And if we do, does it stay that way? I don't know. But having Luke in that room is very valuable. Just because of his presence. I think it gives a calming factor, and you're not going into your preparations for a season saying, all right, our number 2 guy is someone who really hasn't played any meaningful snaps. And that's not to detract from anyone's talent. You just like having your backup quarterback be a guy who has played. Now, we don't ultimately know if Luke will be the guy, if it'll play out that way. These other guys will continue gaining experience through practice, but regardless, they won't have any game experience, or they won't have meaningful game experience, going into the season.
Yeah, for sure. And Luke's still able to go out there and help out on special teams as well. So, not a complete different deal than what he was doing before, but he was really mainly, I believe, man, at wide receiver. Obviously, we're not out there at every practice, and in the fall it gets shut down, but was spending most of not all his time at wide receiver last year with a little bit of QB stuff. Maybe this spring, lots more quarterback in there. Yeah, guys in chat, Luke is still on the team. Really not that far-fetched anymore, honestly, that a guy's still on the team. He would have got here in 2020, though, right?
He was
not
in the 2019 class. Yeah, he was in the same class as, Marshawn Lloyd, Jordan Burch, Luke Doty, et cetera, a bunch of those guys.
Yeah, so
Bookie
throw
Monkey.
in a COVID year and a redshirt year, and
Yep. There you
there you
go.
have it.
Yep.
It's not really – Ja'Kai has actually been here longer than Luke.
Ja'Kai was in the 2019 class. This is year 7 for him.
Yeah. So Luke is there. Luke is, again, a leader, a guy the other guys look up to. And I think Luke has, if he wants it, a future in coaching, which is another reason probably being around those young guys is probably important for him and for the staff and just for those young guys. So, I think for Luke and for the team, it's a luxury to have him in there as an option and to help those guys sort of come along as someone who's seen a lot in his day. Chris, what else? We'll probably cut this thing off here shortly. I'm trying to look through Jack's update. Anything else we have not hit? I thought it was interesting. We won't go too long on special teams, man, but Beamer had a little bit of praise for Mason Love in the punter battle. I thought that stood out. He said the other guys have had their moments, but he kind of mentioned Mason in particular as he's done well. That may be noteworthy at this point in terms of, as you and I have talked about, man, there's going to be battles at snapper, holder, place kicker, punter, kickoff guy. I mean, the whole deal.
As Jet flies a sortie over my house. Sorry.
And probably the guys running down there as gunners and the punt returners and the kickoff returners. Let's just go ahead and list everything.
I mean, it's a lot, right? So we know South Carolina devotes tons of practice time to special teams. And, this is a year where, like, you always need it, and it's paid dividends for them, of course, but it's a little different this year because you're spending that time not just getting better, but like auditioning, right? I mean, he mentioned they've got 4 guys out there auditioning for snappers. So got to find all those. Very much anticipate that competition is going to continue. The only other things, Wes, that really stuck out to me, Beamer addressed position battles at running back, mentioned all, the guys that you would expect, kind of what we would consider that top 4. He mentioned all those guys by name. Defensive tackle, another one, calling that room wide open, and talked a good bit about Xavion Hardy. Hardy, a guy that had to get healthy when he got here, had to get him bigger, stronger. That's an ongoing process. We know, Wes, that he's very talented. He seems to be someone, to me, that listening to Beamer today, he's identified as, hey, if we could get that guy to step up, it would be significant, right? And that's something you and I have talked about as well. They've got to continue, I think, to develop the guys in that room because of the losses they sustained from last season.
No doubt, man. Definitely. And so I think special teams will kind of be an ongoing thing just with all those guys. And I do think there are options in the return game. Like you have athletes on this team. You have athletes. I mean, all those newcomers at receiver can move too. I mean, does a Brian Rowe, does a Lex Cyrus get into the return battle? I mean, I think you have some superb athleticism. Vakari Swain, once you get him back, I've always thought could help you in the return game too. Just his overall ability to make people miss, and we saw that in high school. Big special teams guy. Jalen Kilgore, of course, has caught punts and been involved in that part of things as well. We know that Nick Harbor wants to be involved in the kickoff return game. So I think no shortage of players who could factor in to what's going on in the return spot. And we'll certainly see how that plays out. But all right, y'all, I think we're going to get out of here. That's going to do it for today. We'll be back at some point. Jack will be back on at some point. He and Kendall will do a middle of the week show, I'm sure either tomorrow or Thursday. And then, Chris, we'll have this Friday, right? We are live again from Still Hands Vista location. That is the new distillery there, a great facility, awesome place to hang out. We will be there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, not only talking, I'm sure, some football, but also previewing South Carolina women's basketball in the Final Four. That start time officially 7 o'clock. South Carolina playing Texas for what seems like the 10th time this year, with a trip to the big dance, the trip to the big one, to the championship game, where they will face UCLA or UConn on the line. And that game, of course, will be Sunday, 3 o'clock tip-off. So, all right, y'all, shout out to our sponsors. Shout out to everybody who listened or joined us. And definitely shout out to everybody there in the chat. Appreciate y'all hopping on and just not only consuming, but taking part in the show. So thank you guys, as always. He is Chris. I am Wes. We'll see y'all soon.